many of you heard the riot of birds just before dawn? I mean, really, they should behave. I don't know, I think they're lit up for many reasons, one of which there are more trees to land on. Thank you, Donna and Jimmy. But also, we're at that threshold between the sort of the end of spring and the beginning of summer. And always in that threshold place, there's a kind of both burst of energy and a sense of exhaustion. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, yeah. And things, I'm looking at Tuck nodding his head, things are happening. And both of beneficial nature and also less so. It's so important for us to develop the capacity to notice deeply. And in that noticing, it is a noticing that is embedded, of course, in the present moment, in the rich and revelatory textures of just this moment as it is. And then there is the sense of what we don't notice so often, except I think in New Mexico and Tibet, but we forget the sky. And we actually don't realize how our lives are showing up through the medium of the sky, which is, our seasons. The ebb and flow of the lunar body, the increase of the presence of the sun and its decrease, and what cosmic forces are directly pulling us into alignment or misalignment. Often our view is so embedded in the particularities of the weeds, if you will, of how things should be, instead of being able to include both this kind of scope of immensity and also the scope of intimacy. So our time together has been about the integration of these two planes of being. The plane of being that is in the intimate details, which, we felt in planting the seed, or we feel in the meal that we ate, or we feel in the history, but also the presence of Cato and Alonso and Wendy and Troy, Roxanne and Porter. The details of lives that have been, really embedded in particular landscapes. So I know myself, I've only been here 35 years. I'm curious, who here has been in one landscape for longer than 35 years? Would you raise your hand? So few. So very few. Isn't that amazing? I mean, there's a kind of pilgrim quality, but honestly, we're kind of jumping. I love to see, you guys raise your, but I love to see the, how a landscape shapes your life. As I said, the oak tree is actually an expression of the context of exactly where the acorn is. I want to encourage you to, in a certain way, not rush around so much, looking for novelty, but to go deep into the geography of where you are, or to return to that geography, as Alonso and Cato and Dinan and Kodo and I did through Alonso to this extraordinary place of his life in Chiapas. And watching him move into his village of Tenejapa, his father was the headman in that village, and to see the curious joy of those who greeted you. Of course, they were all drunk as lords. It was during a ceremony. It was really, they tried to get us drunk too. Very spiritual. And it was very funny. It was like, no, thank you so much. What? Yeah, it's like, moonshine. So, nailed by the pin of, raw alcohol. No, thank you so much. I'm not into it. No. But in any case, part of what we've done here is to introduce you to this landscape and its deep roots, as Alonso will be sharing this morning, in the culture of the Southern Hemisphere. And to ask you, also to understand how important this part of the world is, as a generator of rich cultures and of science, as Alonso will be sharing with you. And also, a generator of the experience. If you go to Chaco Canyon, or as we went to the Guadalupe ruins and during the solar eclipse a year or so ago, to understand the kind of persistent and patience that it takes to actually understand how the great scope of the heavens relates to the experience on Earth. So it brings me a lot of joy to introduce to you my neighbor up in the Hermitage area where I live, and also to express gratitude to Alonso and Susan for taking us under the wing of their village. There's not one time that we don't go through the El Valle village. We stop there and we break bread. Usually I bring a chicken and they give me apricots, because that's how it works in the old ways. So my good friend, why don't you come up here and thank you.
Good morning. Buenos días. Thank you for having me here. There were a couple of things that really stood out for me in Porter's talk yesterday and Roxanne's talk as well. First thing, of course, was the importance of community and our families. And so in thinking about that, I just wanted to express my deep thanks to the Upaya community, and especially Roshi, Noah, Wendy, all of the Upaya people who make this occasion happen. It's really truly a great honor to be considered part of your community, and so I'm deeply grateful. Thank you. The other thing that really stood out to me was his comment about how corn is not a plant, that it's a sacred being, and that humans throughout time were domesticated. They became corn, and corn became us. And so I hope that today my talk will help to illustrate that a little bit, to show this evolution, this growth of corn and humans, how they intertwine themselves, and through their birth and development really influenced our lives as not only in the sense of sustenance and nutrition, but also inspired us in many ways to express a beauty of the earth, and taught us how to express ourselves in art form, in writing, poetry, music, etc. And so today I wanted to introduce myself a little bit first, just to let you guys know where my origins came from. My grandparents, my mother and father. I had a chance to meet my grandparents, planted corn with them. And my parents, a very unlikely couple. As you can see, my father was a Maya Indian from the highlands, from Tinapa. My mother from Brooklyn, New York. A Jewish woman who rejected much of her past and history, and adopted actually the indigenous ways. And she felt much more comfortable as an Indian woman. And so yeah, my ancestors. And I got a chance to, my mother got a chance to be with me when I began working in Palenque. And she was excited for me. She said that it would be an adventure, and so it was. But she also warned me. She said that I'd be working in a place that was very powerful, that it was a place that was sacred, and that we should ask for permission to do that. And so today I ask for that permission to speak about these things, because a lot of these things are things that I oftentimes question whether I should be even talking about them. Sorry. Anyway, So I ask for my ancestors to be with us today, to forgive us if we are too bold, and ask for permission from the people of this land as well, to talk about these things, because I know that some of these things are very special. Porter gave us a really beautiful talk yesterday about corn, its origins, its history, the way it has always seems to have been a part of our past, and how we've grown with it. And so I really thank Porter for giving us a really beautiful talk about that. And I won't, it kind of relieves me a little bit of that history, but I did want to share some of that origin of, it's not advancing. I'm not sure why. It's kind of frozen. And thank you also to all the beautiful people out there in our community and in cyberspace and the world. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your patience. Okay. Maybe while we adjust that, I'm going to begin this story about corn because it really becomes one of the fundamental stories of our creation history and mythology. Ishim is the word for corn in the Maya. And that word changes over the course of time as it travels from different place, from its origin to different places. But we know it as Ishim in Maya, in ancient Maya, Ishim in the modern Maya, in my father's language. And where does this story begin? Well, it begins in the caves, in the earth, deep within the in the earth, really. And we imagine that the ancient archaic people of the Americas probably lived in these caves. They did ceremonies in these caves. They lived and died and perished in these caves, and were buried in the caves. And so ancestral remains appear in these caves. And I'll be showing you throughout the course of this talk images of ancient peoples, remains of ancient peoples, and I apologize deeply and ask for your forgiveness for doing that. We speak about corn as being our little bones, and rightly so. I think the ancient peoples, when they went into the caves and as they lived amongst the remains of these archaic people, they came upon the bones of those ancient peoples. And if you know the process of deterioration of a human body, our bones will disintegrate and fall apart. And the very last bone that remains in the human body is our teeth. The enamel from our teeth is harder than any other bone in the body. And so our teeth are like little seeds. They look like a corn seed. And this is why in the Maya world in Mexico, when we say we are smiling, we say pelando la mazorca. We're peeling the corn. We're exposing our teeth.
It's rubbing a little bit.
And so maybe this is where the origin of corn begins. Our ancient peoples recognized that these little seeds were found in the cave, deep within the earth. And so begins the story. The ancestral remains, of course, those also accompanied evidence of the ancient past. And in these caves, we recovered some of those first deposits of agriculture, the first evidence. And this is in Oaxaca, close to the origins of corn. Both there and in other caves that were very dry, those ancient materials were preserved. And so we have a record now of some of those first forays into agriculture. Some of the corn, of course, as we heard yesterday, it was a process of development and selection and growth. And so we know that ancient peoples were developing alongside of it and creating systems that are rooted in agriculture. And so we began this experiment and growth of a organization of society around agriculture. And this was corn truly became sort of the staple of the diet, one that allowed for this fluorescence of human activity around it. And so these caves are truly the important evidence of that and mark the beginning of those developments. Early depictions of caves really also are very special, and they show this deep regard for the cave as a place of origin. We see the Chalcalcingo monument showing this quatrefoil, this quadrilateral kind of shape of a maw of the underworld opening, and around that maw swirls of smoke, swirls of water or vapor emerging, vegetation emerging out of the cave as well. So a great regard for the Mother Earth, viewed as this ancient cosmic beast that opens her mouth, and out of the mouth emerges life. In San Bartolo, Guatemala, relatively recent discovery about 10, 15 years ago, the cave is represented as well with the first images of this corn god, Olmec in aspect, kind of a cross between the pre-classic and the classic period corn god. You can see him there with a gourd, handing a gourd to an attendant. An offering is being made into the cave, which you see on the left side, this maw opening up. Offerings of tamales being made into the cave by a young woman. And then this idea of a florid place, a place of abundance, animals, birds, serpents, flowers, things growing from that cave, that mountain. And so this idea of the mountain, the florid mountain, the mountain of sustenance, is associated as well to to that origin mythology of the corn god. Beautiful paintings. This is a reproduction done by Heather Hurst, who was one of my teachers in drafting the Maya sites. And so begins this story about corn, the story about creation, the corn god emerging out of the earth. How does the earth become? And so a lot of words in those mythologies, those first mythologies that we read, this one from the Popol Vuh, speaking about planting. It's a very, very important metaphor of planting as this act of creation. And so how should the first sowing be? These are some of the first words of the Popol Vuh. And the sky, a very important aspect of the creation is lifting of the skies. And who is responsible for these things? Who are the gods that are present at the creation? I'm a curious person, and I oftentimes get myself in trouble looking for answers. And one of the things that I was curious about was about plants and how they grow and what affects them. And so I began to explore this phenomenon of the Coriolis effect. I don't know if anybody is familiar with that. This is a very curious phenomenon that happens on the Earth, where no major weather patterns are existent on the equator. So storms like hurricanes and typhoons are pushed away from the equator by this mysterious force that, as our planet is turning and moving forward, the clouds are pushed away in such a way so that the northern hemisphere, the storms move in a clockwise pattern, or a counterclockwise pattern. No, it's a clockwise pattern in the north and counterclockwise pattern in the south. And that was very interesting to me because, once again, the Maya are very, very careful, and I think the ancient peoples gravitated, much like the corn, much like the winds did, to a place where those winds would be favorable. Everything came together in a way that corn was favored. And you'll notice in the very lower part of this map in Mexico, where all of these storms are brewing, this is over time, many of these storms hitting these coastlines. The place where it was calm is the very place where corn was discovered. In the southern part of Oaxaca, Tehuacan Valley, Chiapas region. So we get all the favorable effects of these storms, but none of the destructive ones. And so this was a really beautiful thing that I discovered only recently. And this story about these forces is present in these ancient texts. This idea of rain. Where does rain come from? The sky, the hurricane. Actually, the word for hurricane comes from the Maya word, huracán. Huracán is speaking of the sky, can, and it seems that this is a God with 1 foot. They talk about this one-footed God, and we see examples of him throughout the text of this deity that's very much associated to corn. He's the responsible one for bringing out the bloodline, the corn line, the seed line. So these are the elements that are being presented to us as parts of a creation mythology. And then, of course, the representation of creation as a house, as a place that the gods build in order to create life. And so the creation of the heavens and the earth is related and associated to house building. And so we see these texts that describe how the creation is made. And this is exactly the same way the humans were building their homes, their vernacular houses. And so this idea of laying out the foundations of the creation, measuring the sky, stretching the cord, pushing space out to its quadrants, its extensive quadrants. Those were the really key elements that ring out to us and begin to speak to us about this development alongside agriculture of this concern about the sky, this concern that there is something in the sky that relates to agriculture that we can use in order to understand the appropriate cycles of agriculture and what to do in certain occasions and when to do those things. And so we began to see the development of these cosmograms, these world tree cosmograms, where the corn god, as you see, is being shown poised in the center of the cosmos, and the edges of that cosmos surrounding him in a quadrilateral space. Offerings are made like that. And oftentimes we see that as a Pan-American phenomenon. This is maybe not even just Pan-American, it's a world phenomenon. We talked about how we plant the corn and make the sacred cleft in the earth. These were sacred spaces, charged spaces where life emerges. And so today, still in Cancún, in Tenejapa, we talk about Hamalal, our earth, our earthly plane, as being poised in the middle of this quadrilateral, marked in the corners by these great mountains. Or sometimes in the ancient times, we think trees. And we think that it's possible that this is the origin of astronomy, that we're watching these astronomical bodies, the sun and the moon, moving in the course of a year, rising and setting in the north in the summertime, rising and setting in the south in the wintertime. And then in the mid-year, coming to a point in the middle of the sky, and presumably also in the middle of the underworld. Those are the things that, those are the points of very, very charged points of the cosmos. And we talk about how do we understand that movement? How do we explain it? And so very beautiful poetic images emerge as of the sun being regurgitated into the morning sky through the trunk of a tree, or being received into the west, also through these grandfather trees or grandmother trees, bakabs as we would call them, great pillars of the sky. And these images of the ceiba, the yashte or yashche, the green-blue tree, poised in the middle of our cosmos. And so we burn incense in these trees as well. Representation of these trees were used in our incense burners. Early examples of these trees exist in Izapa, pre-classic sites. San Bartolo, one of the first of the kind of the transferring between pre-classic and classic period in Izapa, that image of this tree here, where you see just to the right of it up on top, where the very first dates written in Maya script. And so these are really beautiful examples of the artistry and mastering of the arts, and the critical subject matter that was so important to them at that time, beginning to really develop, beginning to really establish itself as this fundamental cornerstone of this structure that was being built, this language of creation, a language that would propel a civilization to great heights. These are really the beginnings of that. And so we turn our view to the sky again. And I wanted to really point out that in the tropics, there's a very curious phenomenon. If you're ever down below 21 degrees latitude, there will be a day in the year, or 2 days in the year, depending on your latitude, when the sun passes through the center of the sky. That's what we call the zenith passage. In Palenque and in Izapa, where we saw those images, those dates are very critical and influential in development of the calendar. The Maya calendar begins with the 260-day calendar, a calendar that was associated to the moon. Later we understand that it is associated also to gestation period in humans, because 9 months is approximately 260 days. And so this calendar, it was an augury calendar that was used early on in the history to prognosticate and to assign certain qualities to a child's birth. And so one curious thing that I think was recognized and seen in this place where corn was born. Somebody in the field, a farmer perhaps, after planting his corn, left his staff in the ground, standing vertical, and he notices that on that day that he began planting corn, there's no shadow on his staff. And so that was the day that the sun was in the center of the sky. And he plants his seeds there. He's thinking, oh, the sun, the strength of the sun is good for this corn right now. And so we began planting. Curiously enough also, that date is the beginning of the rainy season. And so that coincides as well. And he plants and watches his corn grow. And over the course of that period, he watches from the first zenith passage to the summer solstice. That's the halfway point of corn. He saw that the corn had risen. It's beginning to show its first ears. The hair is showing on the back on the ears. The flowers are emerging. And he waits. And he waits until the next zenith passage. 105 days pass. And his corn is ready. His corn is being almost ready to harvest. And this is he first plants in May or April. And then the next zenith passage occurs in August, the beginning of August. The dog days of August, the dog days of summer, when Sirius begins rising. As the heliacal rising of Sirius. And so that's the time to harvest. We call that the canicula, the dry period in August. when you can bend your corn stalks, and the corn will dry on the field, and then it's ready to harvest. So that was 105 days, almost 3 months. And so he begins to really piece things together, and he realizes in this really phenomenal and cosmic coincidence, if you will, that the rest of the year, the remainder of the year to the winter solstice and back to the next zenith again, is 260 days. And so in his head he says, oh my God, we have the same qualities as corn. Corn is being shown to have the same kind of or complementary gestation period between this plant and the human. Together we make a full year, right? And so this was a really phenomenal basis for this calendar, this way of counting time, and also assigning this very special quality to a human life that is intimately and divinely linked to corn. That was a phenomenal discovery. And so throughout the classic period, as it begins to develop a story of corn as being the fundamental, how would you say, cornerstone of that civilization, we begin to see the florescence of the classic period. And no other site, I believe, is quite as special and so eloquent as Palenque. And I thank my stars and my ancestors and whoever was responsible for bringing me to this place, because it truly became an inspiration, and it was a great honor to be able to work here. It was always the prime example of writing, of sculpture, of art for the Maya, and many of the great advances in hieroglyphic studies took place here in Palenque. And that's because we have some of the longest texts of the Maya inscriptions. We have the most beautiful texts of the Maya inscriptions. We have some beautiful artwork that was beautifully preserved in these incredible temples that were built so well that they house these works of art in such a good way that they were preserved beautifully. And Yuri was, of course, our Capitan and great father of epigraphy. He worked many years way in the other side of the world in Russia, piecing together fragments from the hieroglyphic codes, and posited that these hieroglyphics were a rebus type of hieroglyphics that were phonetic, that they were speaking a language. They were telling. You could pronounce them in a language that was an ancient language that was spoken back then. And he was right, and he published these findings in a very obscure publication that was put down and suppressed because of the Cold War at that time. But he was right, and and to him we owe a great gratitude. Tatiana, also one of my great heroes, and it was really because of her work, because of her artistry, that I was inspired to work in Palenque. Her work, of course, was in Piedras Negras, which I felt that was the the most beautiful place. And I wanted to get to Piedras Negras. As a 15-year-old, I tried to get to Piedras Negras and failed miserably. But I landed in Palenque. And I didn't even know what Palenque was, the site. But I remember sleeping at the waterfalls there overnight and not really understanding where I was. I didn't even visit the main site at that time. I thought this was it, the jungle. And many years later, I was blessed to come back and work there. So this was what Tatiana produced, and her work is really a seminal work because she began to identify not just the counting cycles and the calendar, but also verbs, the key words that told us that these texts were actually historical texts, that they spoke about the births and the accession and the deaths of kings. And so for us, that was a really a beautiful moment in history because we could finally say, as indigenous people, that this is the history of the Americas. This is our true history, a written history. And that was a great moment. And so with those great scholars, along with Linda Shealy and David Stewart and Merle Green Roberts and Alfonso Morales, I was blessed to join one of the projects there. My first project was the Proyecto Grupo de las Cruces, and then later with the Mexican project there, and I began my work as a student, and to record really what was being excavated and to learn what was being expressed in this great city. And so we created our map, our first, well, not the first map, but the complete map of Palenque over the course of 3 years. And then I got a chance to work on really some just extraordinary temples that housed some of the greatest works of art, masterful pieces of art. And one of those places that I worked on was the Temple of the Sun and the Cross Group. And this is where a lot of my growth as an artist and really the beginnings of my work as an astronomer began. And what better place was the Temple of the Sun. The Temple of the Sun, I thought, oh my God, this must be where you're supposed to watch the sun from. And sure enough, as we watched the sun during the course of the year, during my time as an artist, I was able to come into the site early in the morning and work there until after everybody had left. And so we were able to really watch the sun rise and set, and try to piece together a mystery, a story being told by these temples, these great works of art, these massive architectural examples. And we watched the sun rise in the morning in the Temple of the Sun, and this shaft of light piercing the doorways. 3 doorways, 4 doorways, the front of the temple, an interior doorway, a medial wall doorway, and then a doorway in the back of chamber where the sun was being narrowed, and finally piercing the very, very deep interior of that corner of the temple, and just a shaft of light hitting the very corner of that temple and then disappearing. That was it just made us ponder and think, what's going on here? Why are they doing this? What's being said here? What's being told? And then as I began to really sink into the hieroglyphic inscriptions and learn to read some of these inscriptions and interpret them and calculate the dates that were being expressed here. This is the temple of the sun, the tablet of the sun. We always thought that this symbol that was emblazoned on the center of that tablet was the image of the sun. It was a sun god. The king, in his older days, when he took the throne, and it seems the king in his younger days, as he was a young boy, receiving perhaps the first blessing as the young heir to the throne. And in the center of that tablet, the date of his coronation. And so we studied that, and me as a curious astronomer, I plugged in those dates into an astronomical calculator that we are blessed to have now. We're not like the scribes of old, where we had to write everything down in codices. Now we can go into our computer and punch up these dates and see what the sky looked like in those days. And I was expecting to see something spectacular with the sun or something important with the sun. He was he took to the throne on January 10, 684 AD. And it was a strange time to take the throne because his father had died in September of the year before. And normally a king is supposed to take to the throne immediately after his father dies. But Kambalam, the man responsible for these temples, he waited, and he waits until January because he understands that there's something happening then. What that event was actually the moon, a full moon setting and rising at its maximum excursions. The moon has a cycle as well as the sun. The sun has the solstitial maximums. The moon has its lunisticus maximums, what we call the standstills of the moon. Today we are living through that standstill. Today we are experiencing the northern maximum of the moon. As we get closer to June, to the summer solstice, you'll see that the moon at its southern maximum, and then in December, close to the solstice in December, we'll see the northern maximum of the moon. And this is an 18 and 2/3 year cycle, what we call the lunar standstills. And it was just a miraculous and just an astounding realization, because here written in the language of the temple of the sun was this recognition, not just of the sun, but also of the moon. And this temple is oriented to that date, to the lunar maximum. The sun rising at 60 degrees and setting at 300 degrees on the horizon. And so by some chance, miracle, it was the year that we discovered this. It was in 2005. Carol and I were writing a paper on Temple of the Cross, and I stumbled upon this, and I said, Carol, look at this. And I said, and I said, well, when is the next lunar maximum? And it just so happened that it was that year. And so we were able to go and watch in December the full moon setting on the temple of the sun at its lunar maximum. And this is the replication of the date that Khan Balam chose as his coronation. So that was a really phenomenal realization, that these temples are housing this information, that they're dedicated in such a way that they are replicating and they're renewing this story about the sun and the moon. And that story, we bring it back to what the creation mythology really was speaking about. In the temple that is adjacent to the temple of the sun is the temple of the cross. And that is truly a beautiful monument that houses one of the few mentions of this creation myth, this moment of when time begins, when the creation moment begins. And 6 years prior to the creation, on August 12th, 3114 BC, 6 years prior to that, this creator deity lays out the foundations for that new creation. And this deity was identified as Lady Ishim, not Ishim, Mother Ishim, Mother Corn. And so we tell this story about how the completion of the 13th Baktun began. The new creation is started, and this new order is being established as this birthplace of the new world. And one of those key elements in that story is this setting of the hearthstones. We spoke about the hearthstones as being this place of life generation, a place where it seems that the sky is also born as well. And we talk about bringing the stones into the house as being the fundamental act of creation for the house, where the house begins to breathe life. It's the hearthstone, it's the kitchen, it's the place where we create our food, where we sustain ourselves. And so once again, in my curiosity, I say, well, is this constellation Orion? Linda was always talking about this constellation of Orion as being this turtle constellation, the 3 stars on the back of the turtle in Bonampak, or the 3 stones on the turtle in the Madrid Codice. And sure enough, a surprise emerged for us and we recognized that in that date, way deep in the mythological past, Orion was passing through the underworld. It was the lead star, actually, of the belt of Orion, marked the center of the underworld. Mintaka was the marker of the underworld. And over time, it drifts. We have what we call precession, and it drifts away. But at that moment, that's what was going on. So another clue was revealed about this moment of creation. And of course, this moment of creation happens on August 12th. This is the second zenith of the year. So the sun is passing in the center of the sky. Time to plant, or time to harvest the corn. Mintaka and the Orion was passing through the center of the underworld. So we think that this is a key element of the wording of the creation mythology, this axial or biaxial symmetry that's occurring, this place, heart of sky, heart of earth. This statement that's being repeated as the creation mythology. So the hearth being the place where we cook, again, place of creation. We think actually the M42 nebula as being a representation of the smoke emerging out of the three hearthstones of the southern triangle of Orion. And then I started to think about that the examples of creation that are being represented in the classic period, and this beautiful plate of the birth of the maize god from we think the polity of Calakmul, possibly the Campeche region, and Mixtecan depictions of emergence of the gods, depicting this central icon, this central column of either the world tree or the corn plant, the Kante. And in the example of the maize god emerging out of the back of the turtle, this truly was one that was drawing me, and I kept looking at it, and as I began to develop and learn as an astronomer, I realized something quite extraordinary. If this is a depiction of the Earth, the turtle is a depiction of the Earth with this domed shell, the milpa being inscribed on its back, the place of corn, the place of planting corn. And on either side of that shell, the heads of this cosmic serpent that received the sun and the moon as it descended into the horizon. Then if that plate is showing the creation moment, and as stated, the hero twins, the two twins, the sons of the hero of the corn god, the original corn god, are poised on either side of the plane of the earth. Here we see Hunahau on the left and Yashbalam on the right. Hunahau is the first lord, Yashbalam the first jaguar, or little jaguar. He's holding a vessel of water, giving his father the breath of life. And so we associate him to the moon, the keeper of water, the mover of water. As I pondered upon this, I said, well, this must be a representation of the creation moment. Then these two astronomical bodies poised on the horizon, on opposite sides of the horizon, can only say one thing. And that's that this is a full moon. Right? The only time that you would see these two astronomical bodies on either side of the horizon directly opposed from each other is during a full moon. They're balanced on the horizons. And so I said, wow, let me look back again on the creation date. And sure enough, on that creation date, the sun was in the center of the sky, Orion in the center of the underworld. A date is said in the creation scripture of the Temple of the Cross that 354 days later, or 542 days later, 542 days later, about a year and a half later, the second act of creation occurs when Wak Chan is raised, the six heavens, the six sky place is established. And that's the zenith, we think. This is when the sun is in the center of the underworld. So it begins when the sun is in the center of the sky, and then it ends when the sun is poised in the center of the underworld. And this place in the heavens is created, the zenith. That act is that, for me, embodies that feeling of growth, this idea of an energy that's flowing from center of the heart of earth, the heart of sky, this idea of this life force being generated and a opening in the earth that allows this column to occur. These two very special moments. And these moments, of course, we know them now as the cross-quarter days. This is the intermediate point between the solstices and the equinoxes. Zenith happening between the March equinox and the summer solstice. The other cross-quarter happening between summer solstice and the May equinox, or the September August equinox. September equinox. And so this is really was a phenomenal revelation, because we could see now that they're really retrofitting, if you will, their mythology to correspond to an astronomical event. And so somehow during the classic period, astronomy had risen to such a degree that they were able to begin calculating forward and backward what the sky might look like. And this is truly what we consider a scientific breakthrough. This is an achievement of an ancient peoples, of indigenous peoples, an understanding of astronomy and mathematics, and bringing those two together to really tell a story that was very critical and important to the society. And so a lot of things began to really fall into place rapidly as we made that discovery that these temples now begin to function as representations of that creation mythology, that they embody that action of creation. The sun rising at zenith passage, as viewed from the temple that represents the underworld, the center of the underworld, rising into its place at the center of the sky. That's the temple of the cross, as viewed from the temple of the sun or moon, if you will, now. And so as we digest that and look toward other examples of the art and representation of this divine connection that we have between corn and its source of and its place, the source really of corn being at the center of our creation mythology. We turn to the tomb, the great tomb of Kinich Hanapakal. He's one of the great kings of Palenque. Through his reign, Palenque is brought up to its florescence, and he is the father of the genius Kan Balam, who designed those temples in the cross group. And possibly Kan Balam was also responsible for his father's tomb. You would think, because it was his job to place his father to rest. And around the sarcophagus, a great monumental tomb that was hewn out of one solid stone weighing up to 10 tons. The lid placed on top weighing up to 3 or 4 tons. This orchard of ancestors is depicted all around the tomb. You'll see it there as it lays in its. These ancestors are emerging out of a band that we call the Kaban band, which means earth. That's the earth, the representation of the earth. And a cleft in the earth opens, and this ancestor emerges as a tree. These trees are fruiting trees, sapote, the aguacate, the cacao. And so,
Alonso, that one on the side there in his chest there, that kind of T, I believe that's the glyph for seed, at least as I was taught.
yeah, ik.
Ik.
Ik means also wind,
Yeah.
or breath.
Yeah.
But these were really beautiful depictions of the ancestors, and we talk about this regenesis of our lives as the seeds of the ancestors sprouting and giving life to new generations. And so this is what Pacalo is showing himself as, the reborn corn god, and a very lofty statement to say. But these were lofty people. These were our rulers. They embodied this philosophy. They wanted to be that for the people. They wanted to be the likeness of their corn god on earth, and so they had to move like that god. They had to behave like the sun and the moon. And so Kinichana shows himself in that position. He shows himself emerging out of the underworld, this maw of the underworld, that skeletal maw on the sarcophagus lid, opening its that sacred space, and he is being born, rising up in the east to his place in the center of the sky again, as the corn god. And here he is dressed as the corn god, a jade skirt, a diadem that has the turtle of Orion emblazoned on his chest. It's interesting to note that the corn god for the Maya was both male and female. And so he was wearing the kilted dress of the corn god. We call him Kinich. Kinich meaning resplendent or shiny lord. But I'm always drawn to nature, and I always think that nature is our great teacher, and we take things from nature to show in a metaphorical way what our language wants us to say. And so, just out of curiosity, the turtle that he's wearing on his chest is actually shows in his eye the symbol for the sun. Very cool. And his remains are still there in the tomb. That's where he was set to rest. And although we excavated and exposed, and we studied and learned a lot from this treatment of the mortal remains, the little bones, the bones that he left behind. The human body was much like a plant. We say that we are like corn plants, and so what we leave behind is the bones. And so when we plant the bones in the sacred mountain again, what we're expecting is a regenesis of life. And so it is. It seems that this temple represents that. And as they discovered the tomb, they excavated down the staircase, 81 stairs to reach the tomb. The amount of years that it took, that his life lasted. Down these stairs is this curious structure that was basically made of two slabs of stone against the wall of the staircase, forming this tube that descends down into the tomb. and it reaches the upper superstructure, emerges out of this great stone slab that covered the staircase, and then made its way to the front of the temple. It was called a psychoduct early on because it was thought that you could speak through that tube and communicate with the ancient king and maintain that dialogue with the king over time. This was the idea that our ancestors are advocates in the underworld, that if you maintain that communication through them, that you feed them, you dialogue with them over time, that they would be beneficial to you in your life, that they would speak to the gods on your behalf. Today we can say with almost great certainty that this psychoduct is actually a representation of what happens to the corn seed in the ground. When we plant the corn in the ground, the corn does two things. One, it sends its root down into the underworld and establishes a nutrition source. And then once that happens, then the vertical energy takes place and brings the coleoptile up through the earth and pierces the earth in that beautiful way that was described yesterday, like a knife cutting through the earth. And so it emerges, and then the sprout is born, right? Our little sprouts. And so we thought about that again. We pondered and thought, there must be something going on here. And so sure enough, we know from the temple that, and this was my introduction to astronomy through Moises Morales, who he and his son had watched this event take place, this piercing ray of light that comes in through one of the windows in the anterior corridor. The light pierces on the summer solstice and projects a ray of light through the length of that corridor, and we watched that with Moises. That was back in '97 maybe, and Moises was standing there describing it while I was standing under the window. And I watched the sun creeping toward him, and then finally coming up his leg, and I said, "Wow, that's an interesting thing. What if this was part of a ceremony? What if a person standing there could be shown to be somehow special, with this light?" And so we put two and two together on the front of the temple, and in the cross group is the description of the heir presentation of Khan Balam when he was 12 years old by his father as the new heir to the throne, as the new sun god, as the sprout for the new sun god. And this took place in a 5-day ceremony between June 17 through June 25, 642 AD. He was, it's shown on the front of the temple, actually. These ancestors, the grandparents, and the parents of Khan Balam, presenting that boy to the crowd and public below. These are the stucco sculptures of the facade of the Temple of the Inscriptions. And you can see the father on the left, the mother on the right. And actually it's swapped around. The left-hand figure should be the mother. The mother is wearing the skirt of the corn goddess. And it just so happens that psychoduct emerges out of the temple and comes to the base of that depiction of the mother and comes to the mountain that she's standing on. And that is the place where she is presenting the heir, this young sprout of the family. And so on the summer solstice, we remembered that this is the midlife of corn. And we said, well, this is fantastic because corn, if you walk into the milpas there in the summertime, you'll see that the corn is standing the height of a human, right? And the flowers are emerging out of its crown. The first little sprouts are being born out of the stalk, and the little hairs of the corn ears are beginning to emerge out of the corn ears. Well, this is pollination is taking place. The flowers are releasing their golden pollen, and they're falling down onto the hair of the corn. And so this is a moment of pollination. And we say in Maya that when we give our child its new name as from infancy to childhood, we transfer and become somebody new. We switch from holding them on our backs to our side, And so this, I think, is related to that, this moment of he's becoming of age, right? He's becoming pollinated. And so it's a beautiful representation of this divinity, this representation that a human can also display those qualities of divine connection between that entity that was not just a plant, but it was a sacred being, right? As Porter said. So this is for us. It was a really beautiful, how would you say, revelation, a teaching, and we were inspired by that. And it really turned me around in many ways. It brought me down to earth, if you will. After all those years of having my heads in the clouds, and so the whole site itself now becomes alive. It becomes interactive with the sky. It displays this philosophy, this idea of creation, this idea of alignment, this idea of centering, because it's all about centering oneself. It's all about finding one's center and finding one's place in the world, aligning to the sky in that place, becoming a central figure of that place, and so I try to think about that a lot and try to behave that way, or try to learn something from that and employ it in my life. The king, of course, was our leader. He was our political and religious leader. He had to fulfill these obligations, these duties, and perform in a way that was inspirational to his people. I wish that could happen again. And so the architecture of Palenque really resounds with that throughout the whole site. The palace, the place of the king where he lived, where he fulfilled his duties. We know now that the temple where he was crowned, where Pakal was crowned, where the oval tablet is, that was dedicated on a nadir passage in November, so that when the king is seated on his throne, on the date of his coronation, he sees the sun setting on the zenith. It was the day that the sun passed through the center of the sky, and he watches the sun set on that day. These are the two temples that are in the heart of the palace. The coronation temple representing the underworld, nadir, and then the sky temple, the Chana, which was House C, right next to it, in the heart of the palace, dedicated to the zenith. On the zenith. We have the inscription on the hieroglyphic staircase. So it's facing the nadir, so that when anybody watching the king in the center of the palace on his coronation date sees that indeed he's aligned, he's functioning as that idea that he is the center of the world. So this is this projection of centeredness, of alignment to the cosmos, to a story that's being told. And so how does that translate over time? Of course, the divine kings vanished, and they suffered a great blow when weather patterns didn't collaborate with their story. They couldn't fulfill that role, that they were the intermediaries between the gods and the people. And the crops failed, drought came. These kings perished in their temples, in their finery, while the people abandoned them. They walked away from these great sites. These were the farmers. These were the people that sustained the king. They knew what to do. They fled to places that could sustain them, and they could farm. Much like what we will have to do, perhaps. But the living Maya maintained some of those traditions. They thought of this great tree. They still remember this great tree. They still remember the sky. They still celebrate those moments. Day of the Holy Cross is celebrated, and that's a zenith passage. They want to. There's still this innate need to adhere to such a story that it was so powerful, so strong, that they continued that. They talk about the place of the mountain of sustenance, the Chibal, and the ancestors, where the ancestors reside. They celebrate the Nadir passage and the Zenith passage. And Zinacantana is really beautiful because their temple is aligned to the Zenith passage, their church, on the date of their patron saint, and San Lorenzo. But they also celebrate on the opposite side, on the Nadir passage, when the sun is in the underworld. And they do this celebration of the Carnival. And so those traditions linger, they stay with us, and we celebrate. But once again, I'm reminded what Porter says about the fragility of these traditions. Don Antonio, who I learned a lot from in my studies there, a farmer, a real man, he would call himself, a true man, because he was the one who, the last one really, who could perform the ceremonies of the tradition. This was the role of people anybody could be a true person. You had to become a true person. You had to hold the traditions. You had to know how to heal your people. You had to know how to become that center for your people, that tree, that bakab, that central icon for your people, that central. You had to hold the sky in place. This was the role of all people, and that was what he shared with me. One of the things that I thought was really a key moment in my life and turnaround was that we should all learn to say the prayers, to give offerings, to do the work of a true person, right? And so that's our task, and our challenge as people. And with that, I give it back to you guys and ask you to join me and just give thanks for our lives and for our place on this earth, this position on this earth as guardians and caretakers, and that we can fulfill that role in the future. Thank you.
Dear Alonso, thank you for your pondering. Thank you for your pondering. We're going to take a pause here for about 15 minutes break just for the body, and come back, and we want to ponder and to really touch into what we have seen in these hours of putting our hands in the earth and then standing with this vision of what it is to be a true person in our lives today. What is it to be worthy of trust in a world that feels so fraught? And what it is to also see ourselves in congruence, not just with social forces, but with the forces in the natural world. So let's move the body, and let me just see our time. We'll come together at 10 of 11. Thank you. Dear Alonso, thank you.
Rishi, would it be okay for the online closing to happen at 11:30?
Yeah.
Okay, so online, we'll see you. We're going to end our session here, and we'll see you back here at 11:30 for our own closing council. Thank you all so much.